Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. But before we get started, I wanted to throw out a disclaimer because some of the topics in this episode are probably not suitable for children. Also, if you're listening on a podcast and it's audio only, it may be a little bit hard to hear us because we do talk over each other in this episode quite a bit. We're working on it. We know that it's more valuable when you can hear what we say. It does get a little bit chaotic. So stick with us. It smooths out. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
Welcome to the I'm Telling God About This podcast, where we bring the nonsense to God and God into the nonsense. Today, we are looking at why a male stripper was pole dancing at a Christian men's conference.
Just another day.
You say that sentence out loud and you can't not know where we are as a society. Tell me that's not an accurate one-sentence summary. Tell me.
It's not an accurate one-sentence summary, but that's hilarious.
It is.
That's hilarious.
We're going to talk. Yeah, Anderson and I were talking a little bit before the show, and he said that we might actually, he and I agree on this for once, and I refuse to accept that. So
we agree. It's funny. We agree so much on politics, but when it comes to our theology,
biblical ecclesiology, conflict resolution. Heads
exactly.
on pikes.
I'm so much more charitable.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I know. So I'm stuck with and if you ever start a podcast and you agree to do an intro, find out what the topic is, okay? Because I'm now stuck with the very sour-tasting responsibility of describing this travesty to those of you who have been blessed enough not to know about it until right now. So
what happened?
What is this? This is the Stronger Men's Conference. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm going to retch, and I need you guys who are listening audio only to just be okay with that. This is at the Stronger Men's Conference put on by, is it John Lindell? Is that the guy?
And James River Church.
James River, yeah. All right. So they have it's a men's conference where they do a bunch of, I don't know, like intro
manly
act
things.
Yeah, It's an Axe commercial lineup, basically. Okay,
dude, there were dirt bikes, there was like shooting
monster
guns,
trucks.
There was like monster trucks, they were breaking things,
and then they follow that up with a actual former, I suppose, male stripper and sword swallower.
Because that was a title you thought was okay. Like, hey, how do we headline this? Well, we're gonna have sword swallowing at the men's retreat.
And he comes
I don't
out
feel like
and
that's
does
on brand
his
for a Judeo-Christian
disrobing and sword swallowing act as supposedly some display of masculinity, and
we should clip it in right now.
Yeah,
oh my
for
gosh,
sure.
Please, as long as I
don't
want to
have to put
it.
What's ironic is like I'm not worried about getting demonetized on that part. It's like, it's just I feel like I should put an explicit filter on it just for saying that phrase.
Parental advisory.
Jeez Louise.
And so, a bunch of men in this room watched this thing that looked like a very convincing facsimile of a male strip act, and only one of them had the balls to actually get up and address the fact that that's wildly inappropriate.
And surprise, surprise, none other than
Mark Driscoll.
Mark Driscoll.
And you know what's funny?
It's funny
because you have to think about how many times you have to. Oh, Nick, hold on one second. You have to think about how bad you have to screw up as the senior pastor of this church. All right, first of all, you thought I'm going to do a men's event in an arena. Second of all, you thought I'm going to have the person with the title sword swallower anywhere near that. All right, and then third, you said, you know who I'll invite to this? My buddy, Mark Driscoll. I just am like, how were you even there, dude? Were you at any of
every
these
decision was made in isolation.
Like, let's talk about the real victim in this situation, the poor associate pastor who put this joker together, or unpaid intern, who is now just sitting there with his head in his hand. It's like, I didn't know who Mark Driscoll was. And like, John Lindell's looking at them like, just like, how did this happen? How did this happen? Like, I don't know how this happened. I cannot wrap my brain around how many like clear red flags there were to this being a train wreck waiting to happen. So if you take nothing else from this, John Lindell, you screwed up, brother. Like, just
we have an award
on its
at the
face,
end.
and we'll, don't worry, awards will stick around at the end for the awards proceedings. But like, listen, any other way you slice it, like, we could stop the podcast right there. But yeah, go on, Nick.
Yeah, no, so there's
Tim.
basically three different things about this whole situation that have come up. The first is just like the actual thing, the stripper in the room. Why was this allowed? Right? Is there nuance? Is there context that makes sword swallowing in front of a room of
Tim, he's a new believer though.
Discipleship and manhood being
He's a
taught
new-
to the men.
Right. Nick, as the director of Proven Men, do you feel like this is on brand for
Right, do you
biblical
need
masculinity?
contact info to...
This is what we like to say. This is not PM approved. This would be
Okay, excellent.
flag on the field. I'm actually surprised nobody got up during the show. Or, dude, I would not have sat there through that. Anyway.
Ugh. Yeah.
Okay, you guys.
Well,
you guys ready?
also,
So-
hold on. Also, like, there's a big thing.
Let us finish
happening
dunking first, okay,
culturally.
Josh?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we're not done
Dunk
dunking
all you
yet.
want before.
Yeah.
Before
So,
you're
like,
wrong. Go ahead.
You know, I know this is still, a little bit taboo, but like same-sex
for
attraction
you.
is real. And like we've come out of a season
Wrong.
as the
Wrong, but real.
church. Wrong but real. And so it's like, there was a time when we could all like it was okay to joke, to like gay joke. Like when I was in college, that was what everybody did. And now it's like, okay, like I think people are starting to realize like we might have a problem. So like there's another line here which it's like, oh, it's just a bunch of men. Like there's a large amount of men, not a large. There's a percentage of men in that room that are same-sex attracted. And it's like, this is just not okay in general. So it's like,
Right.
oh, there was no lust. It wasn't
Right.
sexual. It's like, no, this is just full-on
and
inappropriate.
it's like,
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Tim. No,
Yes,
sorry.
go
This
ahead.
is just
No,
like
you
I
guys
just want to
finish.
leave this before Josh goes in because I know he's going to bring us around to being gracious and
It's a
magnanimous.
little bit more balanced,
And
I
we
think.
have
the
45
battle axe.
whole more minutes to do that. Okay, but here's my thing, right? Like in ministry, this is my litmus test. In Tim and I were talking about this a little bit before the show, but this is my litmus test. If Jesus walked in
Amen.
on whatever I was doing with his sheep, how's he going to feel about it? And
I think
Yeah.
he was flipping
and
some
I'm
tables
sorry,
at this
I
event.
just
Let me
do
just put
not
it out
know
there.
how you can be the pastor of this church, be up there on that stage with this god awful. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what I'm looking at. Like this
While you're sharing your
god
screen.
awful.
If you're on
I'm
the
just gonna put it
podcast,
out
you'll
there.
have to look it up for yourself.
There-
Maybe we'll link it in
this
the
There it is.
show
holy
notes.
chrome nonsense motorcycle freaking backdrop. That's
Okay.
it's just a giant
Heart.
chrome
Some
motorcycle,
kind of motorcycle.
on the
Because
screen.
it's got to be
It-
manly, Josh.
Right.
Manliness
So-
isn't about having convictions or being authoritative
I
or
wanna
having
get
the
there.
courage to
I wanna
act.
talk
It's
about
about
that.
monster trucks and motorcycles and
So Jesus
fishing.
shows up and you're like, you're not. I'm looking at you. I'm gonna walk up just like right next to John. I'm gonna be like, so John, like just between you and me, man, you a little embarrassed right now, like,
I'm like, what the
'cause-
F?
a lot.
The actual F?
like.
Dude,
Like,
it's cringy
I don't
to
wanna be in
watch.
the room, dude. It's like when your parents walked in and you were like up way past your bedtime, like, with all the Legos pulled out on the floor and like definitely not doing the right thing.
I thought
And
you were
You guys
you're
ever
just
been
like-
to a circus? I'm just curious.
Dude,
Have I
anybody
been
been
to
to a
a
circus?
Yes. Yes.
No, I'm just curious. Like if you're
Benjamin Barnum and
Context.
Bailey. I
Right,
remember
so-
going
so
to those when I
nuance.
grew
yeah.
up.
Well, I'm just saying because it seems like what you're saying is the event itself or the act itself is the thing that is sinful.
I'm saying
or,
it's poor decision making.
Oh, no.
To have a biblical, like a church event where you have certain things happening in the context.
oh sure
of a church
I think
event.
You'd be taken
Look,
the wrong
I'm
way.
not even passing
sorry.
sinful
Well,
judgment.
before
I'm
I go,
just saying
go
this
ahead.
is
You just want to make
stupid.
sure,
Yeah.
make sure you guys are.
That's what I'm getting
are
at.
Done
If you're-
dunking,
Yeah, I'm not saying
or
you
you can
can't.
continue to dunk, but
Sorry, I'm not saying you can't do a
because
circus.
I want to
gotta
hear
back
that
the circus
challenge
up
because
over
I
it one more
promised
time.
everybody
Yeah.
you were going to be wrong, and I want to know exactly why.
How and in what ways? Okay,
Are
go
you
ahead, guys.
actually? So
Go ahead.
to first of all, yeah. So just talking about the actual thing, the thing itself, not this follow-on controversy or whatever.
Mark or
the
any
thing
of that.
itself. Are you arguing that because it wasn't actually a strip show? It was basically like Cirque du
It
Soleil.
was
So what's so bad
Chinese
about it?
pole acrobatics. Okay, that's
right,
how
is
John
that,
Lindell.
Are you actually
And sword swallowing.
arguing that that's the rationalization for why that's benign?
I would like to hear you guys say, is that something that you wouldn't attend? Would
Yes.
you not attend?
I would have
Cirque du Soleil
walked
events
out.
I would have walked
of
out.
Cirque du
If
Soleil?
I would have walked out for sure.
No.
In that,
No.
that's not Cirque du Soleil.
no.
Well, hold on.
They're two
Right.
different
What
things.
is the difference?
I'll
What is
tell
the
Yes,
you.
difference?
okay,
I will
I'll tell you what the.
What is the
fine,
difference?
fine,
One
you
at a
tell me
time.
what the
No,
difference
no,
is.
no, you go.
time.
No.
Hold on,
Tell
let me go
me what the
first. Let me go
difference is.
first, then you
Tell
can
me
nuance it.
go
All
ahead.
right.
Go ahead.
All right.
No, go ahead.
All right.
Oh
This
my
is the
gosh.
difference. If I go to Cirque du Soleil, I am going to a circus performance. I'm making a choice to go do that, right? Like I'm going to do that, right? When I go to a men's Bible conference, right? And I walk in there with my, son or with, some other people or some new person who's maybe not a believer. Like when I was growing up, these are the kinds of things that you were encouraged to like bring your lost friends to, bring Jim from work. He'll be into it, hey, we're going to there's going to be a magician. It's going to be interesting. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
this type of thing though, at least the way it was characterized from what I saw the clips from the video, it's like what is that doing there? It's because it's a
So it sounds like it's a geographic thing, not an actual content thing.
Okay.
From what
No.
you're saying.
Look,
So tell me,
here's
what's
the
the
thing.
content
Cirque
of it
so,
that's bad?
so we'll make that exact comparison.
Yeah,
So
go
it's
for it.
basically just Cirque du Soleil, and they did a gimmicky act at a men's conference. Okay,
Right.
No,
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead.
That's the argument, right? That it's basically the same, and where it's happening is not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here's the thing. If I went to Cirque du Soleil and saw this act, right? They have brand recognition. Everybody knows what that actually is, right? It's not like the Chippendales. Okay. Different kind of thing. So it does not have the sexual performative connotation that a actual strip show does. Okay? If I walked into a not men's conference and there was a variety show and this guy gets up and does the act, the sword swallowing, the stripping
issue.
there.
Yeah.
Oh, I disagree. I would leave too. I'd be like, that's not what I'm here for.
Okay.
That's not what I'm here for.
When you're
I
walking
think-
through Vegas, you'll see stuff like this all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
You'll
yeah.
walk into a room and there'll be a show, and you know
Right.
what?
And you
I'll
don't
walk
sit
out.
there and fixate on it and say, oh, yeah, this is what I'm here for, right? You just, that's not for me. And so the idea that we don't know the difference between Cirque du Soleil and an actual former male stripper and sword swallower
So it's
doing
because
basically
he's-
the exact same thing that he did when he was a stripper and a sword swallower.
False.
What's the difference? What's the difference
So
between what he did
he's
on
not-
that stage and what he did before he was saved as a male stripper?
Because he was stripping on when he was 21
Oh,
years old.
so the argument is he didn't take off all his
enough
clothes.
clothes.
No. Okay, first of all, you guys you're going to just like honestly do some look at the actual shows that have the Chinese pole shows. They take off
I'm aware
their
of them.
clothes because
I know-
it is
yeah.
Let me finish.
It
Let me
is a
finish. Let
thing.
me finish. Let me go on for a little bit before you guys start interrupting me because I've been very very patient with you.
Yes, you
But
have.
here's the thing.
So-
The issue that I hear what you're saying, Tim, is that it's because he was a former stripper that this is a problem.
No.
The difference between then you said that then you made the equation you made it that because he stripped and did the same thing as a stripper as he did at the men's conference.
Right.
That's what you said.
Doing the same things as a stripper in front of a men's conference
Right.
does
He
create
did
a
nothing.
problem.
He did nothing.
He didn't get up
that
there
was-
and juggle.
No, he didn't strip. He wasn't stripping. He wasn't
He took
doing a
his shirt
strip
off.
show.
Was
He
his
took
shirt always off?
And so does every single acrobatic strength display. You have any kind of strength
Yeah,
display.
okay.
When
That's
you're a
fair.
boxer,
All right.
you take off your shirt. When you lift weight, you take off your shirt. You did all
And
kinds
you're
of- there's two-
pretending like you
there's-
can't tell the very specific differences in
What's the-
movement and
All right.
format
What?
Hold on.
between
What's the
that
difference? No,
and a
hold on.
strip
So
Let's
let me
not
go
get-
on. Let me go on. Let me
Go,
get
Josh.
five.
Go-
Let me
get
get
to
5
the-
minutes.
bring
So
it
first
to
of
the-
all,
to the
this
main
guy,
issue.
This guy. With this is a very common performance that is done by circus performers as well as daredevils, right? This is what it was classified as. He was on Britain's Got Talent, and he was in the semifinals doing the same exact act, taking off his shirt, doing the same exact act. It was not sexual then. It was not an issue because nobody knew he was a stripper then. He went on to win Russia's Got Talent doing the same exact act. He went to America's Got Talent first and went on the show doing the same exact act. Nobody had a problem with it. Christians watched it, didn't have a problem with it. That's the problem. You're playing two sides of the field. Now, here's what I am saying, right? I think it was probably not the best idea to have that. Just the same way, I don't think it's the best idea to have a monster truck there. I don't think it's the best idea to go and make it a dirt bike show.
Do you think those
and
things
all
are the
stuff in a
same?
men's conference. I
you
think that
equate
they're
those?
all showy. I think
Equally.
that if you were to say that just because a Chinese pole that's been around for acrobatics act has been around for 900 years, that's never been equated with something sexual until apparently at a men's conference, then you're
Okay.
ignorant and you guys are wrong. So here's what I'm saying. With and especially with taking off the shirt, it says that's what aerobics acts do. Have you ever seen a gymnastics show? Have you ever seen any kind of stuff with
All right, no,
oral strength?
we got
So
it.
that's,
Nick, you
that's
have-
what, so
that-
that's the foundation.
I want to hear what
We
Nick
can
has to
agree
say
because
because
on that.
he's the only
if
one
you
who
want.
hasn't given
But
his
that's all I'll
piece.
say. That's my rage.
Thank
So,
you, Josh.
I just have
Go ahead.
I just have a question. I'm not even like necessarily disagreeing, and I think we can go up a couple thousand feet. Is there all right, I'm going to say a couple things. Let me say them. Is there not very long? Is there is a conversation to be had here around the sacredness of the environment that you are in? And then
Yes.
secondly, is there any church or high church or religious activity in the 21st century that should ever involve not having a shirt on? I'll wait.
Okay, wait. Are you talking about during a service? Or are you
Anything
talking about
that
like
has
a
anything
pre-
to do with a church. My only question is this: I don't care what the gender is.
Okay.
Is it
I mean, I'm
ever?
pro pool parties.
Yeah, I was
Generally
saying. So we got to
speaking.
get rid of pool parties.
So church,
We got to get
pool
rid of
parties.
Youth
Right,
groups.
like
We're not
or-
youth group. Where are people taking their shirts off at youth group? That's
Have
part
you
of our
ever been
problem.
to a youth group?
You never
Like,
been to
I
work-
walked
so,
around
like,
half
you
naked
never
at my
went
youth
to
group.
water
I don't know what you're
parks?
talking about.
Don't put
ever
that
went to
on me.
work?
I grew up in the church. Don't put that on me. I grew up in the church.
No, that never happened.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
we were
you're
all
right.
homeschooled. We'll go.
The answer
Right.
that none of you are giving me, but all are thinking, is that there is no activity that is a church activity
Oh, I can
that
give
is
you one.
really ever okay to involve not having a shirt. We don't even have to talk about the
100%.
potential presupposed sexual
Sure.
nature
Sure.
or lustful nature of the event. I just think at its core,
A general rule.
I'm not going to the circus. I love the circus. I watched a movie last night. I watched an episode of Yellowstone last night, and it had a sex scene in it that I had to forward past because of the lustful desires that I was experiencing because
Sure.
I'm a
What
man.
happened to the fade to black sex
whoa.
scene?
I know,
should
man.
we play
No,
that?
that was way
hey,
more
guys,
classy.
Guys,
Go
that
ahead.
episode of Yellowstone we should play in church, and we'll have to
No.
fast forward through that sex scene. It's totally
Right.
okay because I watched it at my house, so I must be able to watch it on
Right.
church during Sunday morning worship or at a men's event. No, the answer is I should get fired if I try and do that at my church.
Yeah.
So
Simple.
So here's
So
no,
context. Let me give you an
let
answer.
me talk
real
about
quick to your
context
question.
because I
Why don't we give an answer to
Okay.
his question
Calm.
of like when is it appropriate? Okay, so when I grew up in California,
to a tiny axe.
Okay, when
No
I grew
one's
up
judging.
in California, right?
Who grows
there
up
was
in
a ministry-
California?
There was a ministry. I know, right? There was a ministry team called the Power Team. John
my
Jacobs.
gosh.
Right?
I know this-
And he-
I know
don't-
this
have
team.
you
Yeah,
heard about
totally.
them?
Yeah,
Did
I
you hear
know
about
about
them?
the Power
Okay,
Team.
so the Power Team, they would take off their shirts to break bricks and ice and ram through different obstacles, and then with their shirt off, they would go on a microphone and preach the gospel. And that was the
remember them.
biggest thing. It was like, oh man, this is awesome. It drew a crowd. Nobody thought anything sexual of it, but I would
they
say maybe
swallow
that's
swords?
an improvement. Okay.
Were there polls?
What about you guys keep going back?
Did
to
they
the-
do
okay,
something
well,
that
we can
looked
go back
very
to the
much like
sword
a
thing.
strip
I'm trying to
act?
figure out. I'm trying to figure out like what's the issue with sword swallowing that you guys think
Just-
is wrong.
Just
Do you-
think
okay.
about it.
You
for
tell
about-
me what you. I want to know what you think. I think the issue is with sword swallowing.
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you because
You
I
really-
can't
Okay.
fathom.
Are you
I
that
can't
mad?
fathom-
What's going on with the
It's
sword?
a-
I don't know.
No,
I'll be
it's
the
not even
obvious.
negative.
What's
No one's
wrong
being
with
negative.
swords?
Wait, all right. Listen. It's
What's with the
it's-
swords?
What's wrong with sword swallowing that is unchristian?
It's not that. It's the combination in context. It's the whole. It's Josh. You're right. Here's the real. This is
You
what
do
this
know
comes
what
down to.
sword swallowing is an epithet for, yes?
No, I have no idea.
No, sword swallowing is not.
Okay,
it's
so
not
it is
anything.
an epithet for a gay sexual act.
No,
okay?
it's okay. You can do. Here's the thing, guys. Like,
Hughes, are you and I the only
take
ones
a-
who
think
know
so.
Take a step
about
back.
what
No,
goes
take
on in the world?
So take a step back. Here's the thing.
I'm not there.
What you're doing is you're taking an American masculine view on what masculinity is, and because it makes you, and I don't want to say you per se, because
Yeah,
I don't want to
yeah.
accuse you guys, but what it sounds like to me when people say that is that they are insecure about what kind of masculinity
No,
is.
it's
and
not
entails.
that. No, I
Because
understand that, Josh.
Other countries can do that kind of thing, and
I
it's not
agree.
looked at as
You're right.
as homosexual.
Because in those countries,
you know what I'm saying?
homosexuals don't exist because they get killed.
Yes,
I'm saying,
okay.
like, be-
And
No,
for
and I-
those-
so let me-
hold on, let me
about
finish
what
that
you're
before you get to that. Don't before you get to that, Josh. This is what I'm getting at. This is not about what I was triggered by or what I felt.
Sure.
Well,
This
I
is
wanna
what
know
I have
what
to
you
think
guys
about.
are
I'm
triggered
thinking
by.
about this from the perspective of the guy putting on the event. As somebody who does events for young men who are 18 years old to 25 years old and who ministers to that demographic. This demographic that was targeted for this group, I'm in an infantry unit, 700, meat-eating young American men. And I'm telling you right now, if I put up a poster and said, "Come to my men's event, complete with sword-swallowing Chinese pole dancing man and monster trucks," there's only one thing that I'm going to hear about on
And they're
my
gonna
way
laugh
of getting
just like I
laughed
did.
out of the office. Okay?
Sure.
Like, that's... So what I'm
But
trying to
if
tell
he-
you is
if he
that
went
is
to the
where you have
semifinal-
to be relevant. I get it, man. I
If he
get it.
went to the
He's very
semifinal and America's
talented,
Got Talent,
and I'm sure he's a
that
believer.
says something
this
about-
this is the
Right, just
tragedy
saying.
for me too. I get it, Josh. I get it. I'm not saying you're wrong about that,
I
but
am.
it's the sum of its parts, man. This situation is more than just the details. It's the sum of its parts. And what I'm trying to say is that it was not wise. Like,
Oh, I agree.
Sure,
weird.
I'm not saying
men's
that
event.
at
Yeah.
this event. I just don't think in the current cultural climate, and especially where it's at. And you could make the argument.
And we actually do have a solid biblical framework for that, right? So I think the best thing that I can come up with is the 1 Corinthians, women wearing head coverings, men having long hair analogy, right? And that confuses a lot of people because it sounds like Paul's making really specific prescriptive things about women having head covering things at all times, when actually he's applying, universal principles in one very specific culture. And so you have women in that culture who are now trying to eschew the head coverings that were traditional, and they were a symbol of authority of their husband, which, even though that habit didn't originate inside the church, it was biblically compatible with God's created order. So Paul's saying, look, when you take that off, you appear and you are symbolically rebelling against God's created order. So you have to, when you apply these principles, you actually do have to adjust them for how they are perceived and what that means in your culture. And you know what? Frankly, 20 years ago, I would have looked at this situation and thought, yeah, what's the big deal? It's a display of strength.
Yeah.
It's just like whatever. But that's not the culture we live in now. We live in a culture of pride parades and overt explicit sexuality and drag queens being forced on children. And I am telling you that there is not enough daylight between the things that are overtly evil and what they tried to display there in what was supposed to be an explicitly Christian environment.
Can I just respond
Yeah,
to that?
go
Because I
ahead.
don't think
Yeah.
I disagree with you in that regard. So in a Christian sense, because we are hyper aware to that kind of environment, right? We tend to
culture
take
is.
things. Well, I would disagree that our culture looks at sword swallowing and that stunt as being sexualized, mostly because in Western culture, he made it to the semifinals and all the way up to like the finals.
Well, right,
of
but here's
actual-
I can make
hold on.
that
Of all
analogy
of these,
though.
Hold on, all of these shows, he did that, and it was never presented as him being sexual or him being gay or him being anything like that. So I would
But
push back to say that our
No,
culture,
but that's considered
our
normal,
culture
Josh.
is
Yeah.
That's the point.
But okay, no, it's not.
Like, you
it's
can't
not
look at-
normal.
you can't say-
you can't say that
In
it's
our
because
culture,
he was-
that's not normal.
Wait, maybe I'm missing what you're saying. What are you saying?
What I'm
What's
saying
normal?
is that like you can't look at the barometer of culture at large, not being offended or making a stink about a dude doing something that was borderline, that was sexual in nature.
That is arguing from silence. That is
No,
a
it's
fallacy
not.
right
No,
there.
it's not.
No,
No, it's
because
not, 'cause I'm saying-
nobody was because nobody said that it was gay. It was assumed that it was already gay.
No,
That's an argument from silence.
I'm not. I'm not
That's an
saying it
argument
was
from silence.
assumed. I'm not saying it
Then
was
what
assumed
is?
it was gay. I'm not saying
We're
it
not
was assumed
talking
it was
about gay at all.
No,
Well,
what I'm
okay,
saying
what
is
are we
that
talking?
it
Maybe
was.
I'm missing.
Yeah, no. What
You
I'm
said it was
saying is that.
normalized.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is you're saying in all of the times, like this guy went on America's Got Talent in 3 different continents, and he and you know this is a mainstream act, right? And if I understand what you're saying is that this was viewed as mainstream, so we shouldn't see it as being fringe. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, so then what I'm trying to say is
what
that
he does as a professional
what is
performer.
mainstream
Yes.
in the world is fringe, should be fringe to Christians in that regard.
In the
What?
church, like
In-
how
in the
much
performance
mainstream do we allow into the church?
We don't let
When the
certain types of
performance
performance
art
art,
mirrors overtly evil things that
Oh, I know the
closely,
answer.
you do
Or is
actually have to
close
steer
to
away
it.
from it.
Hold on. Swallowing a sword under no circumstances in today's
it's not
culture
just the
is
sword
looked at
swallowing.
as
It's not,
Okay,
yeah.
It's
so
not
what-
just the sword swallowing.
what
It's
is
the
it?
I have
whole-
a friend. I have a Christian friend who is a magician, and he goes around to youth camps and churches, and he uses it as evangelism. To your
Sure.
point, kind of like talking about the strong guys. I think that's actually
Yeah, that's different, yeah.
It's worth discussing because my perspective, and maybe this will help clear up some of the conversational thread, is I understand the epithet is that the sword swallowing is a potentially innuendo towards a homosexual act. I don't disagree, and I understand what you're saying. However, is it really worth debating that there are also magicians that do things like that? I think what we're actually really focusing on is more of the shirtless pole aspect of the
All of that in context.
that is more of what we're saying.
It's
and
the sum of its parts.
if it was just a magician and he was pulling a bunny out of a hat and sawing a lady in half and happened to have a sword swallowing act, and that was the context, no
Right.
one would
That's
have
true.
any
It's true.
assumption
Okay, well-
about this being.
Yeah,
and I would
agreed.
be like, "Yo, it's fine,
Absolutely correct.
cool."
So
Men's
for the
event.
sake of not
But the
going
fact
on
that you
and
can
on and
Google
on
that
about
guy-
this, right? For the sake of not going on and on and on about some nuanced stuff, like
That's
we
what I'm
can
saying.
leave it to
It's
say
not
I disagree.
nuanced, and you're being intentionally obtuse to not recognize the
No,
cultural
he's
So if you're
implications.
going to take it to that
as they
direction,
exist.
Tim, I will continue to go. I was trying to give you an offering of peace because here's the thing, man. Honestly, it just makes Christian men look homophobic and like afraid that they're going to actually accidentally be gay
No, I'm not-
for watching a freaking a guy
No,
take
no,
off
no.
his shirt
No,
at a
no, no.
Christian men's conference.
That's not the
No.
conversation
and
we're
you're
Not
having.
making-
homophobic.
Hold on, you're making.
You're
Well, that's
you
what I'm
put
saying.
all those
But
words in my mouth.
Hold on,
I
you're
never
saying,
said that.
Okay, you said the combination of a pole, a man taking off his shirt, and swallowing a
that.
sword is something akin to homosexual activity. You said
Yes.
So
I'm
what
saying that looks
is
exactly
only-
like a homosexual strip show, except that he didn't
Right.
take off all of his clothes.
right. Okay,
So,
but that's
am I
not
wrong?
What it
Is that incorrect?
That's
Josh,
not what it
Josh,
is. It
Josh,
is incorrect.
we know that.
So that's what I'm saying. Nobody else, but a small slice of Christian men that are obsessed with homosexuality.
So
are
me,
calling
Hughes, and
this a
Mark Driscoll,
homosexual-
that's
No. Hold
No,
on, hold on.
no,
hold on.
I'm not
It's
saying
not
that
that,
for you. I'm
Josh.
saying-
It's the picture. It's the
This is not-
this is really what it comes down to, man. It's just this. It's that it's if it can be perceived by a large enough
There's so
if-
much.
Josh.
So much that could
if I
be
only had
perceived.
to
Let
see-
Hughes go.
Listen,
go ahead.
I only a pastor of an event of this size should have had the same thought.
I
Because it's
agree.
not
We're
worth-
not disagreeing on that point.
No, but that's
I'm
what we are
saying-
disagreeing about. Because what I'm saying is like I'm not talking about if it was like you're sitting here debating like and this is
Wait,
what
are you
I'm
saying
both,
it's sorry? Are you saying it was wrong because it seemed sexual, or it was wrong because it seemed showy? Because I think
no,
it
it was
showy.
wrong
wrong
because
because
it seemed sexual.
it seems
Sexual.
it
So
could be
that's where we
perceived
disagree.
as sexual. That's what I'm getting at because it's not it if you can like on
Not
its
homosexual.
face on its
just sexual.
face it
Sure. Yeah. Fair.
it's
There's a difference.
because of
That's
what's
actually very
going on
true.
in our culture, Josh. It's not because if you took that in itself, just on its own, then I can understand where you get for that. But when you look at everything going on in the world, to the point that Tim was saying earlier,
Right.
when you look at drag queens going into elementary schools, when you look at pride parades, when you look at stuff
Porn
that
being
where
served to
real
children
strippers,
via textbook.
real strippers are actually showing up at real churches too. Like, I understand how you can say like, oh, this comes across as like we're just fear mongering around something foolish, but the reality is like when you do something at the scale, I'm looking at this from the perspective of what was the pastor thinking? was this worth
Sure.
the risk? That's really all I care about. Is I'm really just looking at this saying, was this worth the risk? Millions and millions and millions of people have been talking about this for at least 4 days.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
not nothing, Josh. That's what I'm
And-
trying to say. I
okay.
understand your perspective, but it's not nothing, man. Like, it's not that we're crazy.
I don't. But I understand. I see where you guys are coming from. I'm sorry, Nick. Let me just go real
You're
quick,
good.
and I'll end
You're
here.
good.
I'll end here. I get what you're saying, and that it is perceived. Obviously, it is perceived as being something sexual by online. But here's the problem that I have with that particular narrative.
Yeah.
This event happened on Friday night. Before the event even started, Mark Driscoll spoke in the afternoon on Saturday. Okay. Nobody texted, talked about it, or had an issue with this show until Mark Driscoll said something. And it wasn't even an issue
would have known?
in the news until
not there yet.
somebody equated this guy as
because
being a
Mark makes
stripper.
the news.
That's all I'm saying.
The
We're not-
news is Josh.
So
you're
I'll
right,
end it there.
Josh. But here's your point. To your point, this is the issue. Josh was the thing that brought the video to the eyes of people. When I'm reading in the groups, you're a member of some of these groups too. Like I'm in like the Reform Pub and a bunch of other
Sure.
big Facebook reformer groups.
Reformed.
And
Interesting.
I'm not reformed, but I'm a member of the group because we like to study. We like to study people we disagree with.
Never going to miss an opportunity for that.
I know, it's so good. But Josh, what I was saying is what I found interesting to your point, because I was just like you, when we talked about this a little bit, like, I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Like, okay, Mark said this, and of course, we talked about Mark, but then I went and watched the video. My point is, and let's talk about Mark here in a second, is just that
let's pivot to Mark.
Mark was the thing that propelled it into the national conversation because Mark Driscoll is a national figure of interest. And whenever Mark steps in something, it becomes
Everybody
national
talks.
Christian news. So we're not
would you trust an
talking
eyewitness
about.
account over somebody that has posted it on a Twitter post
I
without
don't
context?
trust Mark's
That's
account
what
of
I'm
it
saying.
on its
I
face.
just
I
think
agree
that
with you.
If it wasn't
I watched,
an issue before it was on Twitter by
Yeah,
anyone,
and
then I think
well, it
that's
was
that's a
something
little
we can
probably.
say.
reductionist because it should have been an issue for the people who were aware of it, and then just more people became aware of it.
well, let's
You know,
talk about
'cause
that
The reason
after
it
we
wasn't
talk
an
about
issue
Mark.
for me was because I didn't know about the
All right,
conference
I
in the
would
first
say
place.
it
is why
wasn't.
would I?
It really wasn't an issue. I don't think it was an issue for Mark, based on what Mark said. Mark had
Let
an
me-
issue.
hear it.
He said a lot
Let
of
me
things.
say my last thing, and then we can
go
talk
ahead.
about Mark. Because we all want to talk about Mark, but we're not ready about talking about
Yeah.
Mark. So we don't have to have the homosexual conversation. Are belly dancers, is it okay for belly dancer display to happen in church? This is not a male gender, female gender
Have
thing.
you been to a
Hold on.
church in Hawaii? That happens all the time.
Okay, so I would say no. Tim,
Do you see how that's an
have-
obviously different culture, though?
Can,
Right.
do
You
you
see
have-
how
it's
the
a different
connotation
setting is fine.
Okay, so
I literally
knows
said
he's
that.
poking
That
fun.
the cultural.
Hold on.
I'm
Hold
yes,
on.
you're
There
right,
are cultures
Tim.
where women go without clothes on tops on. Does that mean that it's
true.
okay to have a church
No.
experience in the West where women just have their breasts
No, it's
hanging out? It's
cultural.
an obvious
Yeah.
answer. That is no. We don't allow belly dancers, and there's no worshipful, because there's a charismatic brand of Christianity that involves dancing and waving banners, and I'm all okay with that. If all of a sudden it became a belly dancing show, I'd be having a conversation on the I'm Telling God About This podcast. And so the point is, it's not a homosexual thing we're discussing. It's a sexual thing. That's what we're talking about. This
It's
is
a
not
perception
allowed
thing.
in the church. This is
it's-
where Jesus would have come in and flipped tables because this is not allowed in the temple. This is
Right.
this could happen on the street outside the temple. Jesus wouldn't have flipped those tables. Inside the temple, this is a no-go. It's that simple. That's all I'm saying. Now we can talk about Mark's response. I'm done.
So
Yeah,
Okay.
so because let me just intro that for people who
Yeah.
don't know,
Yeah, go
right?
ahead.
Because Mark got up and he basically was scheduled to speak, and then after this display, he started calling it out pretty directly and saying like, this is not appropriate, and talking about Asherah poles and the spirit of Jezebel, which I just found out was a thing. I'd never heard.
I loved it.
I'd never heard that phrase before.
it's big in the charismatic circles.
Yeah, and then there was like this whole sort of, tear-jerk reconciliation after John Lindell kicked him off the stage because he was out of line or whatever. And then, like, not kicked him out, he just left. He was like, "You're done." And he was like, "All right, I'm done," and he walked off. And so
received that.
the major...
I think it's awesome, by the way.
I received that.
Right, the major I think, conflict in principle was that somehow Mark was obligated to deal with that privately with John if he had a problem with it. Who wants to give their opinion on that
loved
first?
Mark's response, and I have
Can I-
absolutely no
Can I
problem.
read
Let
his
Josh-
response?
Yeah, Josh has
I'll
done.
just read
I'm going
his
to go ahead and
response
say
in
Josh has probably read more and
Yeah.
watched more on this than all four of us. So I want Josh. I do want to defer to you on your contextual knowledge here because I know you've put more time in than the rest of us to kind of wrap your brain around it. So lay it out.
So basically, what Mark Driscoll said after he gave some of it. I don't know if he gave his whole sermon or some of his sermon, but he talked about Elijah and Jezebel, and then he takes off his hat, takes a knee. And then he says, the reason I don't really want to say this, but he says, the reason I'm hoarse is because I've been praying for you. My heart is very burdened for you. And I want to be very careful with this. And it's not what I wanted to say, but the Jezebel spirit has already been here. He said, and then he goes on to say, the Jezebel spirit opened our event. This is, and he says, this is a rebuke and a correction of no one. Interestingly, this is an observation. Before the word of God was opened, there was a pole. It was a high place. On it was a pole, an Asherah, the same thing that is used at a strip club for women who have the Jezebel spirit to seduce men. In front of that was a man who ripped his shirt off like a woman does in front of a pole at a strip club. That man ascended. See, our God is not arrogant. He descends, or he doesn't ascend. Our God is humble. He descends. Then he swallowed the sword, and during that time, you hear, "You're done, Mark. You're out of line, Mark. You're done." And he says, "All right, I'll take that correction." That's what he said specifically.
Josh,
and then he walked off stage, right?
Hold on, let me say something here real quick. I want to point this out because I think this is important, and I want to make sure because we went really hard, and Josh, with his lone flag of
somebody
helping,
had to take that position,
right? Listen, so I want to make this observation, and I want to concede some ground here to Josh because this is what struck me when I heard that. I love Mark Driscoll. I think Mark Driscoll is a great Bible teacher, which is what made this. This is a textbook thing of like whenever you've spent, and I'm going to say this as somebody who's done this, whenever you spend a lot of time studying a passage in Scripture or working on a major theological theme or trend, you are so engrossed in that you see it everywhere. All right? You see it everywhere. And you have to be judicious in looking in kind of looking at. It's not that it's not present. It's not that there's not that it doesn't leave a trace on things, or it's not a minor reference, but like how big and how profound you make that out to be. And the moment he said there was a high place, there was a man and he ascended, and I'm like, bro,
because what
it's
a
a
high place
stretch.
means.
I know exactly
right?
what you're saying, and I understand why he sees it that way, and I get it. It's a stretch, Mark.
Yeah.
I get it. It is reference. It is a parallel.
He just tried to be fancy. He should have just straight up rebuked
I don't even
them.
think he meant to do. I'm being gracious to Mark too, because what I'm trying to say is like the dude just finished writing
this is
a book.
rebuke to you.
He's
instead
been
of saying
on
this is not a rebuke to anyone.
He's been on the road talking about his book.
Right?
He's been writing this book. Like, I'm sure. Like, and if any of you guys have done you've done a lot of writing and stuff, you know how that goes. Like, I mean, I want to be gracious to Mark to say that like, I'm sure he was up all night trying to figure this out, because he probably did. He was looking at this and he's like, oh man, like it's everywhere. It's attacking us. It's here. Like you can get that place. I'm not saying which is why I spent so much time on this at the beginning of the show. Like, I think Mark was right in saying like, maybe our opener was probably correct.
Yes.
Our opener was not a good thing. Did he do any favors by going in detail about,
I know.
He
that
ascended.
encapsulates everything I feel about Mark Driscoll because I love his energy.
He set up we have a high place. It's
like
the best of the high places. There was
a high place.
epitaph. He went up it. We're the best. Our God. He doesn't. We don't do that. Our God doesn't do that. Our God is humble. On the ground.
We have the best God, don't we,
I've never
folks?
been there. I've never been there, but somebody has told me that the ground is. We're good at the going to the ground. It's important in Christianity.
John,
but,
some people say that you worship
Corinthians,
Asherah.
Yeah.
I would never say that. Some people say that.
Some
and
people
you hired a stripper. But I would
Right.
never say that. That's what people are saying.
Right. And so that's the problem, right?
So we agree
So I
that
get it,
his
right?
his premise was right. His execution was trash.
Was
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah, pretty
So
much.
Josh,
And-
I
and
just
there
say
we-
that
we
to
need
say
more of that.
I understand. I at
Yeah.
least help me understand. Like, is that
So-
a good
Yeah, and I'm
fair
fine
reflection?
agreeing. I find agreeing to disagree on whether it was sexual in nature or it should be viewed as sexual in nature. I think it was a bad. It was something that, just like anything else, the monster truck show and everything, I would equate that to the same thing. But
Yeah.
we can agree to disagree on that.
We can
so
talk about
I'll-
that.
we'll
I
figure
think all that is
But-
I think we
equally as
should,
stupid.
because I
it's
think
like-
there's some
yeah.
statements about how masculinity in general is
Yeah,
viewed in the
honestly.
church. That at a men's conference, you have
Yep.
to shoot up flamethrowers and have a
Yep.
monster truck rally.
Exactly.
And
I'm
I
here
think, look,
for it.
if you want to go to a monster truck rally or a demolition derby or light
for
things
it.
on fire,
Yeah.
because you're a dude, and men tend to enjoy displays of kinetic energy, smashing things, that's fine, and that's perfectly natural. But those are the superficial aspects of masculinity, and when you shoehorn them into a men's conference, so you're like, oh, look at us, we're men, oh, smash, smash, or whatever, it seems like this really try-hard thing
What if
to
it was the main draw?
salvage.
What if it was the main draw for an event? Like, I would take my kids to a monster truck event where the gospel was preached.
Yes,
Yeah,
that would be
no, no.
different.
I don't even have a
I
problem
think.
with the fact that the monster truck is there. Like you said, it was like show and you wouldn't. I wouldn't go that far. I think it's fine to have that kind of stuff. I think the spirit in which it's done
Right.
is trying to salvage some level of safe masculinity that the modern
Yeah.
church
Yeah.
has decided that they're
They had a
comfortable
chrome
with. So,
motorcycle
you
on
can
the stage.
Smash
Yeah.
your cars. Yeah, you can
Wasn't in
smash your
good faith,
cars
Josh.
together.
Don't give them too much credit, man.
Right.
Well,
Right,
that
you
goes
can
back
light
to
things
Josh.
on fire.
What
but-
if there was separation? What if there was separation between like the actual Word of God being opened and the, because obviously it wasn't like, oh, we're doing a session, somebody's preaching, and then we're gonna do a sword
Who
swallowing or
paid
monster
for
truck or
it?
something. Like, if it's at the beginning to say,
that's
hey,
good.
this is like the icebreaker, right? I don't
Josh.
know. I'm wondering. I don't think it's wise if you're going to advertise for men, and I agree with what you're saying, Tim, about it's like a bad look on a Christian masculinity to say, oh, this is what masculinity looks like.
What happens in
At the
secular
same time,
culture, too, that you have to approach masculinity in these safe confines of, oh, look at me, I swung an axe, and I
Right.
lit a thing on fire, and I
maybe we should
went
do,
fishing.
you know what we should do? We should do an
Biblical
episode on
masculinity.
masculinity.
Oh,
Exactly.
no, we will. We should and we can, because we're four dudes.
Yeah.
We actually are
Sorry,
well
we're
equipped
gonna
to
do it.
have that
Step on
conversation.
I realize I'm stepping on everybody here, so
No.
I'll try to be more.
No, because that's the
No,
truth.
we're
Because
stepping
I
on
do
you.
think-
It's the other way around.
I do think the weird thing about that is that we do feel like because what I saw from Mark Driscoll was the most masculine thing, the most authoritative act of conviction. Again, execution flawed, but I thought that was the most masculine thing I saw, far above the monster trucks or the flamethrowers or whatever else. And we have decided to conflate the two things and say, oh no, I can be a manly man if I do all the superficial manly things because men like cars and
Right.
engines and all of this stuff.
I want to talk about this because this is what I think is what is missing in the church, and it's hiding behind the eyes of Matthew 18. And I'm going to say this as a pastor, like if I'm doing something in the context of the body, and I sin in that context, or I'm in the midst of sinning in that context, and you don't stand up and say something or or proffer a correction if it's serious, right? Like you need to be like, it needs to
Sure.
be appropriate,
Don't miss.
right?
Right.
But like I like I said before, like I'm getting ready to preach this Sunday. I write my sermons as if Jesus is sitting in the front row with a pen and paper. That is
good.
that is the only thing that I am concerned about, because that is who I know I'm being judged by. So what I'm concerned about is, I think if more pastors, we've created a culture in Western Christianity where speaking up against things that don't make sense
Being
in a
confrontational.
public event,
Right.
being confrontational at all is chastised and dealt with very severely as being divisive.
And that's why
And Paul was
agree.
that's why I
critical
brought
of-
up the Paul versus Peter conflict, because
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the archetype.
But we need that, because here's the thing, like unity is important, and that's the difference. Is that like if I was when we did house church, if I were to have said something that was out there, and I've done this to at least one of you at one point in time.
That's out there, Josh. Never.
I've never stopped you from in the middle of a thought and been like, hold on,
Genesis 6.
break. Like true. I've never done that, right? Like, but you got, because here's the thing, like here's why I disagree with the Matthew 18 premise for this situation. If that pastor had sinned against...
Yeah, what does that mean?
So for Matthew 18, which we actually should...
If a brother sins against you, go to him in private and talk to him in private. If he receives that correction, you've gained a brother. If he does not receive that correction, take one or two elders with you, and I'm summarizing here, but take one or two elders with you and talk with him and ask for him to repent. And if he still does not repent, then take it to the church.
Yeah,
and then talk about it with the church. And if he's unrepentant after that, then treat him like a Gentile or a tax collector.
And this is why
essentially shun him.
Yes, and this is why I don't think that... I feel like pulling Matthew 18 out against Mark in this context was inappropriate, because the issue was not that the pastor had sinned against Mark.
Correct.
The issue was that the pastor was sinning against his flock, and Mark, as a pastor... felt that there was danger in his perception. I'm not going to say that, right?
Okay.
But in Mark's perception, the pastor was not sinning against him. The pastor was sinning against the flock.
Yeah, for the sake of argument, just imagine he brought in an actual stripper.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that, like...
honestly.
Anyway, but that was the perspective. So in other words, you're watching a shepherd lead his flock off of a cliff, even if you're wrong, but that's your perception.
Sure.
Would we not want... as a pastor or as a man, would you not want somebody to raise their hand and be like, something doesn't seem right?
Right.
Now,
and those
we can
conflicts
argue
are not
about
always resolved cleanly, as with Paul and
correct
Barnabas. Or not,
Mark, John Mark.
John Mark. So that's all I'm getting at is that, good. So go ahead, Josh.
I would say I agree with you, Josh, that it doesn't follow strictly to the Matthew 18 model, because it's supposed to be within, like, your brother sins against you, specifically you bring it up to him. Here's the issue. I think that we can value certain things with Matthew 18. If there is an issue, I think that we should follow the same model, but we can't claim authority of that model, right? So you can learn from the wisdom to say, hey, it's probably better to go to somebody in private, right? And so I don't think that John Lindell was authoritative, essentially, in claiming Matthew 18 in that sense, to say you should have contacted, you should have talked to
I will
Mark.
say
Here's
was
the other thing.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
But here's the thing with that: when this happened on Friday night, he had Mark Driscoll had all the time in the world to talk with John and say, hey, I had a problem with it, right? And so what I suggest would be, and I think Dr. Michael Brown actually did a post on this and said the same thing, and he said, like, what would have been better is that you go to John Lindell and you say, hey, I have a real problem with this. This is really a sinful thing. And then if John says, no, I stand by it, which he would have, you say, well, then, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and bow out. I'm not participating.
Yeah, but
in
who
this,
speaks?
Right?
But who speaks to those people, though? That's the issue. So here's what I can imagine. I'm assuming. I'm going to make an assumption.
Spiritual father is held accountable, essentially.
Sure, he's
for
accountable.
His flock.
He's accountable.
Yes,
but you're there.
But here's the thing: Mark's criticism theologically was so much of a stretch.
I
don't even know.
I
if
agree.
I could
The specific
even say
imagery
that
he
would
chose.
have been,
Totally agree.
right.
I'm just Josh.
That's
I'm
why
just
I
saying
say
for the
he had
sake. Let's
good
imagine it's a
instincts.
different
Yeah.
situation.
So wait, let's grant.
I guess what I'm saying is imagine it's a different
100%
situation.
agree. Yeah, he should have just gone out
Okay.
and said something.
Yeah, right.
Or he said. Or here's what I think he should have done.
if you knew he would have shut him
He should have
down.
left. He should have left and went to the media or went to
No,
the,
but yeah,
the,
but then
Assemblies
those
of
young
God or
men
whatever,
or those
already
women.
right there, yeah.
and
But
just saying,
here's
like,
the
this
point.
is why I'm wrong with it. Right?
And Mark, listen, this was Mark's thing, and I know this about him, and like I have history with Mars Hill. I've met Mark. He used to be my pastor. Full disclosure.
When he was a cool,
all right.
the
when
cool.
I had
youth
long
pastor
hair,
look, right?
and when I was in
He
a
had
different
the shark tooth necklace. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And the soul patch.
Totally true. If you look it up, you'll find pictures. And there's the internet out there. But here's what I think. What I know about him is this: that man's deepest heart is for men, and so what Mark understands, sometimes to his fault, overzealous, and he's prophetic. Like, that's his gifting, and that's the downside. Every spiritual gift has has pitfalls aligned with it, right? And his gift is speaking truth in the moment to get to the core of things. And when it comes to talking about men, like that was just like I kind of feel bad for him because I feel like it was a coup de grace situation. Like he was sitting there and I can just see him thinking like there's young men and boys in this audience that are going to see that and they're going to think that nobody in this church saw it as weird or wrong and nobody had the voice to stand up and nobody said anything. And if I just go and I talk to this guy and then he shuts me down and then I don't have the platform and then those guys walk out of here and I am literally, I have nothing beyond my personal experience with him or knowing him briefly or him being my pastor, sitting under his teaching for, almost 2 years. Like apart from that and what I've said, like I'm being empathetic when I say that I can imagine that being his mentality. I could be totally wrong, but like that's kind of what went through my head when I'm saying like how does this happen, But if we imagined that, what I think is an interesting thing though is that if we imagine that it was a much more cut and dry case, like it was an actual stripper or it was something ridiculous, what would that response be appropriate?
That's a good question. I think that
you wouldn't speak out against a stripper
I think it's a good question because I think that in one sense, if it is obvious gratuitous evil, that like having a stripper go and strip their clothes off at a men's conference, which I mean, amazing.
I can't imagine it happening, but maybe pick a different example, right? Josh. Pick a different example.
Right. So whatever it is, right? Some sort of obvious sinful thing. I don't know if it was that obvious that it would need to be called out because I think that there would be a riot in the congregation.
So what if you walked in and there were money changers profiting off of people's prayers in the...
And the chief priests are just walking around like nothing's going on.
Tim, you got to talk about it afterwards. You don't make a scene, and you weaker brother or the go to your brother principle, and then if they don't
Jesus
do it,
just
then
pulls over the chief priest and is like, "Hey, I want to talk to you about these money changers." No. What Jesus did is he was just like, he sat. Okay. It was Friday night. He just sat in the back and he watched everybody. He's like, "None of you are going to do anything. No one's going to do anything, huh?
Yeah.
You guys are just going to keep walking? Okay, Roger.
Jesus,
all
maybe,
of you Levites? Okay.
Let me just if I was being the zealous Christian that I am, I'd make a whip and I'd whip Alex Magala
for
breaking
right
the shirt
for Jesus,
but at the same time,
people or
because
tables,
because the look of it might look more sexual that I'm whipping him. Maybe that's not the right move.
You're not wrong. Today, you got a word. Perception is everything,
according
man.
To you guys'
I'm
logic,
scared to wear pink shirts.
Correct.
All right?
But okay. You gave me a light bulb. Okay, Jesus' naked body on a crucifix in the church.
We don't do that. We're Protestant.
He's not on
that great
cross.
example
we don't have to worry about that.
What he did with his naked body informs what we do with our naked bodies. This is me speaking my book right now because this is the stuff I do all day long. And it's like, back to my premise of there's pretty much no one who gets to have a naked body in the Church of God except for one, and it happened to be his son. That's the only one allowed in the door.
Yeah.
Right. And it's his righteousness that covers us.
And I would bet you $1 million if this dude didn't have his shirt off and did whatever his act was, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
There were basically 4 specific things that in conjunction really start to look like a facsimile of something that is definitely inappropriate in a church. That's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah. I think my issue with the
questionable
whole
Google
sexual
history.
The question. Well, right, yeah. But I think my issue with this is I don't think that under any other circumstances other than a Christian conference it would have been viewed as being erotic or sexual in some
everyone
sense.
agrees
we
with
can
that.
disagree
Josh,
on that.
we agree.
No, we agree.
But
we
right, like someone was
with you.
sitting in the audience of
Circus
I
Olay.
was saying you gave me a very specific set of things that were happening, and what I was responding to when I said that was basically you're just in this show, and all of a sudden an essentially male stripper act comes out, but doesn't take off all of his clothes, doing what I see as being pretty overtly sexual things, right? Without context, right? It just starts happening, and all of a sudden I'm just sitting there like, wait, what did I walk into? So that is a different context than an America's Got Talent or whatever it was.
I agree, and let me be a little bit charitable charitable to that. My issue is, I think, more with the prudish, hypersensitive nature of biblical or American masculinity than the issue that we're, whether you're doing a show and trying to caricature what biblical masculinity is, which is what I think they were doing. At the same time, here, let me be a little bit charitable and give some concessions to you guys on what you're saying. Like, the environment makes it worse. If you're a pastor at a men's conference, you should know your audience. You should know your audience, right? And so if you're going to have something that could potentially be questionable, like,
I think our culture is so filthy. I guarantee you a big chunk of that audience had those same thoughts. I guarantee you when they said sword swallower, they snickered. Like, if there was not a 15-year-old boy in that audience who was just like...
When I literally read the headline, I was like, he did what? This can't be that bad. And then I saw the first screenshot, and I was like, I'm like, somebody's losing their job that they weren't getting paid for.
It's like, hold my beer.
Right, exactly.
Oh my
Anyway,
gosh.
hold on. I want to hear more about this, Josh, because here's what I hear from you.
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone who's been watching this show has recognized like that you've gone a little harder. I mean, you've gone a little harder on this one and other ones, which I love. What I want to make sure we give due consideration to, and what's interesting to me is tell me why what is it about what is the not the fear or the worry that this prudish oversensitivity to these types of things, the way that you characterized it, like what is it that, and I'm not asking this combatively, I'm asking just to understand where your
I'm listening,
like kind of where your heart is at. Yeah, you don't have the axe, okay?
Because
but go on. Yeah,
I think that the issue that I have is consistency. If I'm going to be logically consistent with and looking at an act that is presented in one way in the world, and then suddenly it only has an issue with the church, like, you could make that same case, and like you could make the case that Christians are the creators of cancel culture for something that is not taken a particular way, but it's only taken away just by the Christians, and they're going to cancel it and deem it as horrible or awful, right? I'm protecting against what I see as Catholic canon law of the Spanish Inquisition, against hyper Calvinism, against hyper legalism. Now, I think that I agree with you. I don't think that was a good act to share, but I think the way that it has been handled is absolutely grotesque online. The things that are said, the blatant misrepresentation to say that this was a stripper dance and he was a stripper. The guy professing, regardless, we can argue about whether he's really a Christian or not.
He probably
is.
A
professing.
I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe
I grant that.
But he's
I'm
a
not questioning the man's
professing Christian.
salvation.
He goes to a church in Los Angeles. He's and the fact that when my issue is more of what's happened behind the scenes, and I don't want to make this about Mark Driscoll and the issues with Mark Driscoll, other than to say this: there were some things that Mark Driscoll could have done to correct the situation and not make it as big as it was, by not going after this Alex Magala guy once he realized that he was a Christian, and look at his story as saying, okay, well, he's a professing Christian. Now, if it turns out that he wasn't a professing Christian, or this is just a show, okay. But on his Instagram and on his Twitter, he writes a message and say, hey, I have to respond. I'm a professing Christian. Like, this is my life. This was my life at 21 when I was struggling. I was at the bottom of my barrel, right?
But think about the difficulty of that.
That type of response, the way that it wounds, I think, the church, to go and say, you can perform at a church or be a part of a church and share your talents and your gifts. Maybe it's outside of a church or something, but the moment that you have a past and you're a Christian, like, well, we're crucify you. And that's what I kind of saw it as.
I hear that.
Can I talk about that specifically, though? Because there is a struggle there, right? Because obviously these are skill sets that he developed as in an entertainment context, and obviously in an immoral context in some other areas.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's difficult because it's like, okay, well, I become a Christian, and now basically the thing that I'm best at has a whole lot of really bad connotations that are that are attached in perception space to a lot of the things that are very overtly antithetical to the church. I'm sympathetic to that conflict, and I think, there's probably plenty of situations in which he could, as an entertainer, do some of those things and try to steer around the similarities that it has to things that are immoral.
Yeah. And Josh, I'll say that, I want to say this because I think this is a really good tie-in, which is funny with Mark, of all things, which is really funny that he's involved with this, because first I want to talk about this really briefly. In Christianity, there is a double standard on what we tolerate in and out of sacred space, or in the context of and authority. Like Jesus, that's why the Pharisees got all bent out of shape about Jesus doing, being around certain people
right
outside of sacred spaces, right? What we see with Jesus is his view that there's, and we could argue some of that could have been tied to the covenant at the time, which I would agree, temple versus synagogue, but Jesus respected that distinction. He did not believe that this distinction of how we stand before God and our desire for the appearance of righteousness or holiness should prevent us from loving people. And that's why he went out and did that. And so I understand that tension. I feel that as well. And the way that I navigate that myself personally is by saying I am very conscious about what I do as a teacher whenever I'm in that capacity. So if you put me on a podium and you put people in front of me and say, this is the guy who's going to lay some things out for you and he's trustworthy, then whatever comes out of my mouth or whatever I'm accountable for, I place a higher standard on than what, say, I might do, in terms of, not that there's a drastic distinction, but I'm saying I'm not going to show, certain movies or shows at a church event that Nick brought up, right? But I might go see those shows, and I don't think that there's anything distinctively wrong with those two things. But with Mark, this is what's fascinating. Mark, when I was there in 2009, was getting raked over the coals by the southern churches and the religious Protestant establishment for having heavy rock bands as worship teams because of the perception of that, right? The same argument, right? Well, where's the sacred space? What's the, now granted, what, to Mark's defense, his point was, I understand that these images bring different things to mind in your culture, but in my culture, this is normal, right? The rock and roll picture of people, with tattoos and, nose piercings leading worship from the from the front, would never be tolerated in Montgomery, Alabama. But in Seattle, nobody's questioning that dude's heart for the Lord just because of the way he looks, because everybody looks like that. And so there's something to be said about the globalizing nature and the way that the internet, and I think that's a really interesting part of the story, is exactly kind of what you pointed out, is we're talking about this, having not been there, having very little to, no connection with the people. We have some connection to what's going on, but the idea that we watch a clip of a video, a couple clips of video and some entertainment, and then we pass judgment. We're a global church, and that's kind of one of the things that it's I think what's healthy is to look at these situations and be hey, however this played out, I'm not passing judgment, but I'll tell you what I'm not going to do, or that would never work here, or it serves as there's stuff we can learn from it. And that's kind of what, to wrap this up, I think, unless there's more you guys want to put on this, but I think that's the value here, is to say, look, Mark, how he, what can we look at? Well, we can look at hey, sometimes you do need to speak up in the moment.
Yeah.
You have to weigh that out, because who's going to judge you? Like, we can sit here and armchair quarterback it from the internet, but like, you have to stand before God and give an account for that. And you have to deal with the potential fracture in unity. And like, let's make no mistake, unity is like the second biggest theme in the New Testament. It's a big deal. Not something to be trifled with. Unity? Yeah. And so that's all I'm getting at. Yeah, go ahead.
That's, that it's really interesting you bring that up, because that was something that was on my heart too, is the idea of unity and all of this, right? I think that it's something that we need to also take a step back and see and recognize that the things that happen in the unseen realm are affecting the seen realm, right? The powers and the principalities are at work to divide the body of Christ, right? And so when I look at something like this, and we're in an election year, so there's already political back and forth. We're making big deals out of things that we didn't make big deals out of before. I'm talking not us, but like, because we make big deals out of everything all the time. But I'm saying everybody else takes that, right? But so that's political. I've seen an uptick in disunity between the Reformed and non-Reformed. I've seen an uptick in the disunity between Catholics and Protestants. Catholics, since the 50s and 60s, have kind of taken a step back approach of let's be peaceable. But now you got a lot more Catholic apologists that are really condemning Protestants, and
we have a serious bifurcation in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Between so like your very liberal wing and your
and even within the Catholic Church. So like there is such a divisive I would say Jezebelian spirit above this
charismatics. Am I right?
I know. Yeah, I know.
Josh, hold
I
on.
think that's really interesting that you bring that up, because I do see that. Because here's the thing. Let me make this point. And I know I go on and on, but let me make this point. If me disagreeing with what Mark Driscoll did and misrepresenting the event as I see it prevents me from being charitable to the next person that calls out a sin, that's the enemy has won, right? I want to be able to say, call out that sin, bring this country back, call a spade, speak out for the gospel, right? Like, so just because I might disagree with something, or I think he went about something in bad charity or bad faith, I don't want that to dampen or hinder my view of anybody being courageous to stand up against culture. And I think that everybody listening should the same exact way. If you agree with me, I know a majority of you don't, and I know we'll probably get some Driscoll fans in the comments.
Can we?
Ooh, maybe we can comment. I would love that, actually. Comments.
That would be cool. I'll figure that out. But
let's
anyway,
take a vote.
Just saying that.
Like if you agree with Josh Anderson, and subscribe if you agree with you.
That's clear. That's clear.
Like if you agree with me, and dislike if you hate yourself.
Let me leave a comment. Go into that unity aspect, though, and because this is something that I see deeply frustrating, and I'm a very confrontational person, so it's natural for me to be just like this. I know, right?
News. Cuddly teddy bear.
But you see it happen a lot where, either whether it's Matthew 18 or any of the themes of unity or things like that are used as a way to skirt actually having conflict about a thing. And this is what I found so extremely slimy. Okay, so are we going to argue about how we argue, or are we going to try to actually resolve the thing? Okay? And you see, and in the church, you see that kind of behavior manifested in this, oh, well, you were mean. You called me out publicly. Or is this really pursuing unity? And I just want to make the point that unity between Christians is not a lateral exercise between people. We find our unity in Christ, right?
Amen.
And so that's the basis of it. And so if you're calling out, because another big theme in the New Testament is calling out heresy. It happened all over the place. Every other letter that Paul's
preserving
rattling off is some other heresy.
So on that, hold on, because this is really important with that. This is what we've been talking about. We've talked about the fourth turning. We've talked about how we're seeing this pendulum swing back to people dividing along ideological lines. And what's going to happen is we're going to see these the stiffenings, because here's the thing: people who have specific opinions have stronger opinions. We're going to see them polarize first, because like you're going to see Calvinists becoming ultra Calvinists. You're going to see Catholics becoming super Calvinists, like Protestants becoming super Protestants. That is an indication of what we're talking about, because that will be the precursor to like Christians coming together against sin. And people will it
become them coming together against sin, or will it be the justification to divide on theological lines to go to civil war?
Will exist, that will happen, but ultimately what I'm getting at is as people become more comfortable with not being about being morally right instead of being polite, living like according to their individual convictions and belief system, as that becomes more important than civility or politeness, that is what is going to, like, you'll see bridges built towards the bigger threats. And I think this is really interesting, because like Tim and I were talking about this the other day, like about this whole idea about even men's conferences and where does that come from. And I'm like, you know why we see these as being cringe is because they're a holdover from the last time we went through this fourth turning situation, when people rallied to show that their ideas had numbers, and so people would understand that they'd reached consensus. And you know what's fascinating, and I've thought about this too, because it's like, you know, political rallies have been a thing for forever, right? But Trump's been throwing rallies while he was president, through his presidency, re-election, right? Like, and people are showing up, and it's kind of like they're like their own thing. And it's something that I've started to pay more attention to, is that rallies have become a much bigger thing. And I would suggest that you're going to see them become much bigger things, that as we progress in this season, you're going to start to see people want to gather to demonstrate that their ideas have power behind them in the terms of populace. So just think about that so I say that just to say it's important to have convictions, and as we talked about in the last episode and some of the other ones, it's important to speak out about what you believe, but also to be mindful of the fact that, like, we have, and I hate to quote this is a Mark Driscoll from his book The Remnant, state boundaries and national boundaries of Christianity. He talked about this in The Death of Christendom. Like, you know, we have state boundaries, sure, but we fight on national boundaries, right? And so it's an important thing to think about. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim for our proceedings for
I believe
the
this is
Millstone
our second ever
Yes.
second ever Millstone
Award.
We have a quorum. Do we have any objections?
Somebody
votes?
explain first that we need a
have
quorum
yays?
decided.
Claps? Do you have
Oh, do I have the
No,
claps?
but we
Do I
can
have
add
the
it.
claps?
We'll
Hold
add
on,
it
let me
in
see if
post.
this is it.
We'll add it in post.
Nope, I can't tell.
Nope,
if
that's the joke.
That's the joke one. I can't even
Hold on.
hear it.
Actually,
So you have to tell me.
I got it.
We did say this was going to John Lindell,
hold on,
right?
wait.
This is our...
Yeah.
No, I couldn't do it.
Can we get the slow clap of like Tom Hardy?
Right.
You know when he's like,
Yeah. So
Tee it up.
you've got a guy who completely misreads the culture that he's in, right? It decides to superimpose on what should be strong, moral masculinity a cheap, superficial caricature of monster trucks and motorcycles. And as if that's the epitome of what it means to be a Christian man. And then he bitches out when he's called out by Mark Driscoll. He does. And so I think that he did actually put himself in the position of leading some of these astray. And that is
bold.
the criteria for a millstone. Do you want to
need quorum
object,
for the
Anderson?
Millstone
I can-
Award.
All in
I-
favor.
I object because I don't agree that it was a stripping act. I think that it was logically consistent to say it was
I didn't
the
say
same
anything
thing.
about stripping.
So wait,
I didn't say
wait.
anything
You think it was
about
nothing
that.
like
Get a Millstone.
I don't think it was a
Millstone
good
Award
idea,
is
but I would
not
also...
okay,
given.
that's what we're
But
getting at.
Well,
Was it a good idea or not? Did he lead people
but I don't-
astray
no,
or
no.
not?
Okay, but I would put it in the same category as a monster truck or a tank running over cars.
So
And
I don't
I
think that
that's
you
always
leave
the
a rabbit
things
in a
I-
monster
Monster
Stray.
truck and Chris
I don't think it leads people astray. But you guys have your Millstone party.
No.
and I-
No, we
No,
can't.
sit on the
we have
cliff.
a forum.
You
I
We
was-
have rules. We have rules.
We can't give it.
We have to.
Well,
come on. There's like you have
John,
a
you're off.
3/4 rule.
You get off
You
it,
can-
man.
Listen,
The
this is
millstone
like
is not a
dude
lightweight
perfect. You
thing.
gotta have four
that's so
greens,
true. That's so true.
or we can't do it.
Can't do it.
All right,
Can't do it.
No
brother.
okay.
Millstone. Well,
Listen,
So upset.
don't worry. Don't worry, John. You'll get another shot. We'll see you
I was gonna
again.
say, yeah,
This, I'm
second
sure.
chances.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep an eye on this guy.
Well,
I'm going to find a reason
you
to
go
give
on
him a
the list.
millstone that Anderson
You go
will get
on
on
the
board
list.
with.
Hey, I would just say this, guys. Just be careful because of the same measure that you judge, you will be judged. So I would just take that.
Agreed.
easy.
Completely agreed.
Harsh but fair.
For the record, I wouldn't give Mark Driscoll a Millstone Award. Just putting it
Do you
out
want
there.
to?
I would not.
Oh, I wouldn't either. No. I love his energy. His execution, not so
I'm not
great.
talking about for this. I mean, just in totality of everything that
just
not
Christians
for
love
this.
to bash on.
I think
no,
for- for
Christians
everything
love to
else.
bash
Can
on
people
Mark
share an
Driscoll.
award for their combined folly in
I
this
know,
entire
right?
event?
This whole event,
Can
this
we,
whole
like,
event, I will
share-
say this
can we
is a
give them both
millstone. We
for
could
the
just,
both of
the
them?
men's
We need
conference is a millstone.
No.
Don't
We
try
have to award it to
salvage
people.
It's,
We need
Can
a
we give
media
them
article.
both
millstones
millstone?
go around individual necks.
Okay.
What's before
I
a
mean, a
millstone?
millstone's pretty
corporate-
heavy. I feel like you could hang
I would
two necks with one
probably-
millstone.
What about
Yeah.
a
Solid,
stumbling
substantial
block?
piece of rock.
Stumbling block
How many
award?
No,
people
that's
would
the
you have to tie
gospel.
to one millstone
Gospel's
before
stumbling
No,
block.
we
That's
don't
a
want
good
that.
thing.
Good thing.
That's
yeah.
right.
We want
I'm
to
just
stub
looking for
toes.
one.
I know.
Stub
I hear
toes,
you.
you're right.
There's a lesser.
Well, we can see this is
millstone. I don't know.
devolving. If you've listened this
Quickly.
long,
Anyway.
bless you.
I'm sorry. We had a big finale, and I had to, crap
No,
on it
it's
because
good.
you guys are wrong.
It counts.
No, because you had the moral conviction.
Ladies
you
and
had
gentlemen.
the moral conviction to stand up for what you believe, unlike the people who
What?
were in that conference hall.
What a
We're
yeah,
so
hey.
thankful that you've stuck around this long and hung out with us if you have. Hey, listen, a lot of you are watching. Not a lot of you are subscribing. Not a lot at all. So I'm looking at you. Yes, you. Go ahead. Use your finger.
Shoot, am I
Probably
subscribed?
somewhere
Like,
about
like,
here. I don't know.
subscribe,
Click the
tip,
subscribe
probably not
button.
even
Bonus points
subscribed.
for the bell. Listen, God doesn't
And
care,
share.
but I do.
Share the episode.
All
I
right?
want you to
So share
Quasimodo
it.
that bell
All right? We
on and
care.
off a couple of times, but make sure you leave
That's
it on.
right.
on.
Quasimodo.
We
We
sound
upset a
uber
few people
desperate.
on the abortion episode. We lost some folks, so we need you to uptick, all right? We need you to represent.
Oh, did we
All
really?
right.
We lost some
Oh,
subscribers.
yes,
yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Well,
we're doing
also,
something right.
YouTube,
Throttled
the
community
crap
noted
out of
us.
Yep.
They
I
actually
knew that
put a
was gonna
community
happen.
note of hey, this is how to have an abortion. Click here. So, badge of honor. Okay, that's what I say.
Okay, if they were Christians, they would get a millstone.
All right.
Too.
YouTube gets. Oh, that's a
On
good
that
point.
note,
Yeah.
All
we
right.
hope you all have enjoyed the episode. Tune in.